3 U.S. citizens, an Australian and a British citizen, were kidnapped in Turkey late Friday. Turkish authorities say the Westerners were on a mission in search of Noah's Ark when they were abducted by a band of Turkish separatists near Karlovia.
Now, we had gone to Turkey in late August to talk to the appropriate authorities about getting a permit to excavate Noah's Ark. And we were hopeful of being able to do a little preliminary work this fall, and then of course be able to do the excavation next summer. As it turned out, we were successful in getting our permit, and on a Thursday afternoon we were promised that the permit would be ready for us Monday. This, of course, gave us 3 days to wait somewhere. Now, we decided that we would like to go down into the southeastern portion of Turkey and look at 2 mountains that were called Nimrut Dağ, or Mountains of Nimrod. We had flown out to Erzurum, got our taxi driver, Dilavar. Since there were 4 of us, we decided to get a minibus instead of a taxi, as that would be too crowded, and there's not that great a difference in the price of having a minibus or a taxi. So we rounded up the minibus and a driver and headed off down towards Bengal in plenty of time to get through that area that was a known terrorist-controlled area before nightfall. The road was torn up, and we were delayed enough so that we were about 8 miles outside of Bengal when the car, there was 4 vehicles in front of us, suddenly turned broadside of the road and blocked the road, and all of us had to come to a stop. And out of the woods on both sides of the road came these people with AK-47s and other automatic weapons, hand grenades, and shall we say, it didn't take long for them to sort through the people on the regularly scheduled bus that was just in front of us. They found a British tourist in there. They brought him out, and of course they got the 4 of us, and off through the woods we went. And this area is called the Black Hell. It's a very, very rough terrain, and on our way out, after we had gotten away from these terrorists and were being flown out by helicopter, we were able to video some of this to give you an idea of the type of terrain that we had to travel through every night for approximately 21 nights. We had to sleep on the ground during the day, and it did get quite cold before the 21 days ended. It was not a comfortable trip by any stretch of the imagination.
Wyatt was in Turkey with 5 other Westerners when they were kidnapped early this morning by Kurdish guerrillas. Kurdish Workers' Party is the group suspected in the kidnapping. Mary Nell Wyatt acknowledges that spending so much time in Turkey is risky. Ron Wyatt has made 30 trips there since 1977, but she's confident her husband will be released.
I expect them to be released and go about their work. They're over there for a purpose.
As we left the bus, I took some money from my wallet and put it where I could get it easily without being noticed, and with the intent of dropping this at intervals along the way that we were being taken, so that a search group would be able to find at least the direction we left from. Also, I didn't know exactly what these people had in mind. I had heard about 10 German tourists being taken about 3 weeks before that, and they had been released in about a week to 10 days unharmed. But I wasn't sure whether this was the same group and whether their intentions were just to hold us to get attention, or whether they had something else in mind. So as we left the bus, we went down a very steep embankment. Then we began to climb a hill or a mountain that was very, very steep, and it was very difficult climbing. And when we got to the top, I decided that if we were going to be killed anyway, that then would be better than after we had been drug all through these mountains for whatever period of time they had in mind. So I was quite out of breath. That much was not pretense, but I pretended to have a heart attack and collapsed to the ground. And in my anesthesia work, one of the most unnerving things that can happen is a convulsion. If it's epileptic, you know what to do for it. If it's not, shall we say, we still know what to do, but it's a rather unnerving experience. So I faked some seizures. My idea and intent was that if these people were intending to kill us, that they would probably just simply blow me away and take the other people and go on. They didn't do this. They shall we say, expressed quite a bit of concern. So anyway, once I decided they weren't going to kill us, and I had successfully dropped some money along the route to lead somebody in after us, I decided that it might be wise to go ahead and go on with the people. It's possible that they would have left me behind if I had just continued my sinking spell there. But anyway, they gave me 2 terrorists, one under each arm, and off we went through the mountains. And later on, when some of the fellows were complaining about how difficult the trip was, I teased them a bit and said they were just lucky they didn't have to carry 2 terrorists around like I did. Anyway, I wasn't carrying them. They were helpful in getting over the rough terrain. They had much better vision than I have, and shall we say, they kept me from falling over rocks and that sort of thing in the dark. Now basically every night we traveled, and the amount of distance that we covered had something to do with the closeness of those that were looking for us. And then during the daytime we were forced to lay on the ground under the bushes. Now early on in this experience, there were helicopters that began to look for us, and news over the Sony shortwave radios that the terrorists had, that the American embassy, the British embassy, and the Australian embassy had moved certain people to Bengal, and that they were going to stay there until we were found. These embassies setting up offices in the local city was kind of a surprise to the terrorists, but they were delighted to get all the attention that they were getting. And when possible, when the newscasts came on about them and their captives, they, shall we say, danced and sang and had a real good time. Needless to say, we didn't join in those festivities.
Today, Wyatt's wife was told by the State Department that her husband's longtime escort and driver, who was with the group just before the kidnapping, had been arrested by the Turkish government, questioned about possible involvement with the kidnappers, and then was released this morning.
I was concerned because I knew that Ron was very close to De La Var, and I knew how he trusted him. He trusts him in ways that he doesn't trust a lot of people. And so I knew there was no doubt, and I felt helpless. I wanted to do something.
But Mary Nell still has no word about her husband.
There's really nothing, they don't have any new information as such. They told me that while they know it was near the town of Bengal that they were taken hostage, they still don't know where they are. still don't know which particular group is claiming responsibility for this, because there's been no claim and no demands made yet.
But there is speculation that it was the Kurdish Workers' Party that kidnapped the men, the same group that kidnapped 10 German tourists from the same area a month ago.
What I've heard is that the group that have him doesn't like tourism over in Turkey or anything, and he's working on a project that would bring a whole lot of tourism into the country.
At first, I was very worried about him. I still am, but I believe that he is doing the Lord's work and that everything will turn out the way it's supposed to.
It looks to me like they just want a microphone to be heard, and this is the only way they can get it.
Well, actually, a lot is going on, but I'm kind of...
The Wyatt's phone won't stop ringing. Anxious relatives and friends are slowly getting the disturbing news.
I'm nervous. I'm concerned because he's one of the nicest men I know.
On the 4th day of our captivity, the Turkish military cornered the terrorist group that held us, and before they closed all the way in, the commander of the group, who was called Abraham, explained to us, those of us that weren't asleep, that the police on one side of our encampment were no problem, and he's mentioned that he paid them lira. He just simply said lira, 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 no problem. And but he pointed in the other direction to the other side and said, police, big problem. And so anyway, a little later that afternoon, we noticed some people on the tops of ridges, roughly a mile from our position, and down in the valley just below us, a military officer yelled to the terrorist leader and demanded that they surrender and that they release us hostages, our tourists, as they referred to us. The terrorist leader yelled back for them to go away or they would kill the tourist immediately. Now, we were sitting on the ground at this point in time, and 3 of the terrorists got up and took positions to our just in front of us, basically, one to the left, one to the right, and one right in front of us. They flipped their automatic weapons to automatic, and one of the men, the one standing right in front of us, had tears running down his face. Now this convinced me that he believed that the end had arrived. Of course, I'm sure they expected that the military would kill all of them, and of course they were going to kill us first. So I said a little prayer, another one of many, and a text came to mind, and that is, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." Now, that wasn't the text I was hoping would come to mind in that particular situation. However, reflecting on that, had we been killed there, our lives were in order, or at least mine was, as much as, humanly possible. And there was no reason to believe that I would not have been resurrected in the first resurrection. Also, I was aware that God was quite able to take care of my family and quite able to get the work done without me. And so I really felt a bit of relief at that point in time. If you're doing this work, as important as it is, one must be so careful not to get yourself into it too much, and to make sure that you know God's will at every step of the way. There's a bit of stress involved in that, and the thought that God could go ahead and finish it and I could just, shall we say, wake up in the first resurrection was not that unpleasant a thought at that point in time. Anyway, the military officer shouted back that they would go away, but that they would encircle this black hell region so that the terrorists could not take us anywhere out of there. And this was a good thing they did that, because the terrorists were constantly talking, saying that the best thing for them to do was to take us to Iraq. Now, had they managed to get us to Iraq, our futures would certainly have been in jeopardy, because there, as far as I know, there would have been no way that anybody could have helped us. And these people were very, very pleased at the attention they were getting from us. Now, that night after the military left, let me add one more thing. The military officer told them that if they harmed the tourist, that the military would burn them out. And in fact, they set fire to a mountain not too far from our location, I guess to convince them that they were serious. That night, we traveled probably about 15 miles over this rough terrain in an attempt to maybe get outside whatever military encirclement they had planned. Obviously, we were not successful in getting all the way out of the military encirclement, because the people were talking about the police and pointing in all the different directions.
If he was in Lebanon, it would disturb me greatly, but it wasn't.
To listen to Mary Nell Wyatt, one might think her husband Ron is just late coming home from work. Hers hardly seems the voice of someone whose spouse disappeared a week ago, reportedly the captive of violent rebels thousands of miles away.
Ron takes only calculated risks. You know, he weighs everything before he does something.
Wyatt's confident tone belies her faith in her religion, and faith that her husband is about to be free. Ron Wyatt is a nurse in Nashville, but he's dedicated his life to proving that this formation in the mountains of eastern Turkey is in fact the remains of Noah's Ark. 8 days ago, the U.S. State Department said members of the Kurdish Workers' Party, or PKK, kidnapped Wyatt and 4 others on a tour through eastern Turkey. The PKK is a rebel group fighting for an independent Kurdish state in eastern Turkey and northern Iraq.
You know, they're living under other governments, and they're just trying to strong-arm their way somehow to exert their dominance.
Today, the Associated Press reported that Wyatt and his colleagues would be freed tomorrow. The AP says PKK leaders made that claim in a message to a Turkish newspaper. But that report conflicts with a French wire service story today. It quotes a PKK leader denying any involvement in a kidnapping.
Now, the next major event was near the end of the 20 days or 21 days total. There was no news coming over the radio, and this, of course, was not to their liking, so they wanted to kind of shake the tree again and see what else they could get. So they decided to move us, and what they told us was that we would be in a hotel the next day. And of course, this was very pleasant news to the ones that believed that they were being honest with them. So anyway, we were getting ready that night to leave, and at about 7 o'clock, when we were going to start out to get back to where a car could pick us up and move us, another news bulletin came over the radio, and of course that was the end of our travels. We just stayed right where we were. Now, there's some indication in that they were not willing to actually release us. There got to be more reason to believe that as the next 2 days progressed. When they decided that they were not going to take us, a couple of us talked to the commander, and shall we say, we registered as strong a complaint as you could under those circumstances. In fact, our complaint was to the point that they doubled our guard and warned them to stay away from us, out of reach and that, because they were convinced that we might try to overpower somebody and break free. So the decision was reached that they were going to move us the next night. So the next evening we left from that encampment and traveled down to an area where we were to meet a car. They referred to it as a taxi. On the 19th day of our captivity, our hostage status, there was a considerable amount of digging taking place down the hill from us and around, shall we say, to the right of the direction we were facing. That, shall we say, they dug quite a deep hole, and I overheard some of their comments, and it was der Mac tourists. We were the tourists, and der Mac means to kill or to permanently stop. So I, at that point, was fearful that they would decide to kill us and to change into their civilian clothes and just kind of filter out through the military encirclement. That, of course, was one of their options. And they had proven that to be a workable option, because some of them had changed into civilian clothes and gone into town and gotten some things and came back. After they finished digging the hole and came back to where we were, the commander of the group and the turjuman, they called her, that simply means translator, came to us and told us what they wanted us to say when we got out. Now, I believe that this, when we got out, thing was just to see how cooperative we were willing to be, and so they could determine what kind of risk to take in moving us, or simply just to kill us and bury us and then filter out through the military lines themselves. So they came and told us that they wanted us to say that as two of us were too old to travel through these mountains at night, that they had blindfolded us, put us in a car, taken us to a house, and put us under the house, or in a basement or cellar. Well, I didn't intend to lie either, but I, having overheard these people talk about killing us and them having this hole dug, I didn't figure it was the time to tell them that I wasn't going to lie. So I nodded and smiled and made very sure I understood what they wanted us to say. I never once said I would say it, and I certainly didn't say that I would not say it. Anyway, we are back to the car. On the 21st day, which would be the 22nd night of our experience, I heard the doors opening, I heard the trunk opening and closing once, I heard the hood open and close. These sounds gave me a very strong impression that they were rigging this car to blow up. a couple of weeks later, there were 2 cars that were blown up in Ankara and killed some people. Now, whether they were these cars or one of those cars was this one, I do not know. But it does show that they have the ability to rig cars to blow up and that they're willing to do that. My belief was that if they had nothing in mind but to take us into town and drop us off near a hotel, that they could have told the driver that in our presence. And if they were just simply checking the oil or something in the vehicle, they could have also done that in our presence. So I was of the opinion that they had something in mind other than taking us to a hotel. I apparently was the only one that felt this way. After about a 30-minute wait, we were put in the car. I was of the opinion, since there would just be one terrorist in the car, that during the trip to wherever he was going to take us, even though the car might be rigged to explode, was probably our best opportunity to escape. At all other times, there were many guns on us or near us, and we were in an area where we did not know our way out for sure, and there was a great number of terrorists between us and the road in any direction we could have chosen to take. Also, they left guns near us. This is something that I had experienced before when I spent 78 days in an Arab prison accused of being an Israeli spy. The guns, of course, would have been empty, and had we grabbed those and attempted to use them, we would have been killed trying to escape. Now, these people may indeed have been motivated to keep us alive while we were cooperating with them, but it was very obvious from the onset that they were quite willing to kill us if there was any benefit to be derived from it. And of course, if we were trying to escape, then in their manner of thinking, they would not, that would not be their, shall we say, fault. Now then, I chose to get in the car directly behind the driver, and nobody objected to that. I had kept a very low and very friendly profile all during the 21 days, and I doubt seriously that anybody expected any trouble from me. So, and also I was one of the older ones, and I was, shall we say, kind of hobbled up. I did sprain my right leg quite severely, but anyway, I took that position. 2 of our party rode in the front seat. It was a bucket seat vehicle, a 4-wheel drive, not 4-wheel drive, but a 4-speed. And with those 2 people jammed in the front seat, the driver was only able to use the first and the second gears when driving. And the condition of the road out there was such that that was all he could have used anyway. Then the other 2 Americans sat in the back seat with me. So we headed off through the night, and it was a very rough trip. We had to get out, throw rocks out of the road so the car wouldn't drag. It did drag a time or 2, and I was quite concerned that the oil pan would get a hole knocked in it or something would happen that would strand us out in those mountains. But finally, we got to the Blacktop Road. Now, as we were approaching the Blacktop Road, I asked the driver if there was a good hotel in that town, the intention being to find out for sure that he was thinking in terms of a hotel. And I simply said, Güzel Hotel. This means good hotel. And he says, Çok Güzel Hotel, which means very nice or very good hotel. So when we got to the Blacktop Road, if he were indeed taking us to or near a hotel, he would have turned right. When he turned left instead of right and told us he was going to take us to where we could call and get a taxi, I knew then that something was up. This was at 12:30 a.m. In that area that's controlled by Kurdish terrorists at night, nobody stirs. There were no phones in the direction he was going, and had there been a phone, there would be no taxi driver willing to come out there at that hour of the morning and get us. So I knew he was up to something. As we progressed along about 2 blocks, we ran into the military blockade, and this was, shall we say, a nervousing experience, because I was quite sure that they had the car rigged to explode. The man had a hand grenade and a handgun available to him, and had there been a shootout, I doubt seriously that many of us would have survived that. So I didn't take any measures to try to attract the attention of the military, and he drove right through. The windows were steamed up and the car was jammed full, and of course all cars out in southeastern Turkey are jammed full. There's not many cars, and everybody wants to go when somebody goes anywhere. So apparently it didn't look suspicious to the military, and they let us go right through. I asked the man to stop, to and let us out. He named a town on down the road that he wanted to go to. Well, this town was very near the place that we had been abducted to begin with. And I explained to the other folks in the car that this man was not taking us to a phone. There was no phones out there. And I thought that since they didn't respond, one did, said that he believed the man was really going to do that. I didn't anticipate the trouble, or shall we say the reaction I got. Anyway, just down the road a little ways from the military, where we passed through the military, there was a wide area where trucks pulled off during the hours that a restaurant was open across the street. Of course, it wasn't open that time of the morning. But I pinned the driver down from behind him so he couldn't hit anything to blow the car up or do us any damage, and I got the steering wheel of the car and steered it off into this gravel parking area, and then cut the wheel sharply back to the right and spun it out. And I said, "Get out." I was greeted with what sounded like every one of the hostages saying, "You blankety blank fool, are you trying to kill us?" That I had not expected. I told the driver hotel and gradually turned him loose slowly so that I could grab him again if he tried anything dangerous. He simply started the car up and proceeded in the same direction he was going. Now, the only individual I was concerned about was this big gentleman from North Carolina who could have put out my lights long enough till we had been back under a bunch of gun barrels by the time I came, shall we say, got back to reality. So I asked him if he wanted to go home to his wife and children, or if he wanted to keep being a hostage for no telling how long. And he said he wanted to go home, and he said it in a voice that I knew he meant exactly that he did want to go home and that he wouldn't interfere. So I reached between the bucket seats, shoved the car out of second gear into neutral, got the bottom of the steering wheel and turned it to the right, which would have forced him to run into the side of this little culvert bridge type thing we were going across, or to stop. We weren't going fast enough to hurt us if we had hit the side of the bridge. He stopped. I pushed my door open and said, "Get out." And so they got out, and everybody headed back up the street towards the military group. And there was no problem in our covering the distance back to where the military, Turkish military were. Now, we simply were debriefed. After that, we were treated quite nicely. The clothes that we had worn all that time were thrown away by the Turkish military. We were able to get some shoes, get some medical treatment. We signed warrants for the arrest and imprisonment of our captors. Then we were flown out by helicopter from there to Batman, Turkey. There, the Black Hawk Squadron. It was a helicopter battle group, were on maneuvers, and as we went back out over the area, we were able to film a bit of that. Now, you'll notice in the video taken on the helicopter that my eyes were busy looking down on both sides of the helicopter, and I was acting quite nervous. The reason for this is that I knew those terrorists had at least 4 upgraded Browning automatic rifles that were quite capable of bringing down a helicopter. And so the news, I was sure, had already got to them that we had not told what they wanted us to tell. And I thought the probabilities of this them trying to blow this American helicopter out of the air was very real. And what I didn't know was that there was a very large twin-propped helicopter bristling with armament that was shadowing us from where I was sitting. I couldn't see this. So I was, shall we say, not a happy camper until we got to the Black Hawk landing base at Batman. From there, we were flown into Incirlik Air Force Base. These people treated us very, very nicely. Everybody, the Australian, the Briton, and ourselves. And shall we say, we were given some psychological information so that we wouldn't think we were crazy when we had bad dreams about being back out in the area and having flashbacks and that sort of thing.
A Nashville woman says her husband looks tired and a little thinner, but otherwise in good health after the ordeal he's been through. Mary Nell Wyatt today got to see the first pictures of her husband, Ron, since Kurdish rebels released him from 3 weeks of captivity.
Oh, it's so good to see him.
Ron Wyatt is an amateur archaeologist who was kidnapped in eastern Turkey along with 4 other Westerners.
They were constantly traveling by foot, that they were moving them around all night long, and then the only time they could sleep was during the day, and they said it was so cold that and they didn't have warm clothing.
Mrs. Wyatt expects her husband home early next week.
First class.
That's right, he's going to be up there with the captain.
Recording in here, Michelle, hit this button right here.
Inside?
Right there. You can go ahead and hit it.
He's got a cane.